Turning our attention over to the grain markets now, President Joe Biden made a trip to an Iowa ethanol plant this past week to make an announcement that he hopes will ease fuel prices. With dried distillers' grains behind him, Biden said that his administration would sign an emergency order to ensure 15% ethanol would remain in fuel pumps this summer. Without that waiver, E15 is not allowed to be sold around most of the country from June 1st until September 15th. Joining us now is Luke Beckman of Central Valley Ag to discuss that announcement as well as the other factors impacting the markets. Luke, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Happy to be here, Bryce. Thank you.
Luke, talk about this announcement. Did it impact the corn market as that news came out?
I certainly think it added to the bullish aura that we really have around the corn market and grains and oilseeds. It's not going to make a giant impact just in terms of outright corn demand, but it certainly is positive if you think about the margin environment that the ethanol producer finds themselves in. Really, our stocks, as you look at the weekly ethanol report, we're sitting on a fairly high level of ethanol stocks, and part of that's logistical issues, related to moving product and how rail performance has been. But certainly it's a positive development, Bryce, as we look at, pushing ethanol, more ethanol into gasoline consumption and blending it into our fuel supply. Reality is 1.5% of our retail fuel locations across the U.S. carry and offer E15, so it's not a huge amount. If you really wanted to get down to the numbers and how to quantify how it's going to impact corn demand, if you do the math and make a few assumptions about how much gasoline demand, what that's going to look like this summer, you're really talking about 12 to 15 million bushels of corn production, additional corn production that's going to go through the ethanol channel because of this E15 announcement this summer. So certainly it's a positive for the ethanol story. It's positive for corn. The bigger question is going to be, can we make this a long-term change so that we can see the blending rate go from an E10 to an E15 permanently? Positive development, and it's going to help certainly push corn and can keep the bulls fed as we continue to find higher prices.
Luke, you hinted at what I wanted to ask you next. I hear the word temporary when it comes to this waiver. Is that only addressing this summer, or do we know the long-term impact if we could see E15 year-round?
I think the emergency status of this really makes it a summer play for the administration, certainly scrambling a little bit with all the inflationary pressures and high gasoline prices. And certainly as we head into the midterms, it's an opportunity to appease farm country as we look at using more corn-based ethanol in our fuel supply. So as of right now, it feels like a temporary situation, but it could certainly help corn ethanol demand land on some stable footing if we could change that blending rate from E10 to E15 permanently, but no signs of that currently.
Let's talk about inflation. Of course, that continues to be on the front of mind for traders as they look at these markets. What's your take on how inflation is currently impacting the commodity prices, Luke?
Well, we're sitting here talking about ethanol and talking about E15. We talk about prices at this level. I mean, really, corn futures today, Wednesday up 5.5 cents. July futures at 7.78. We're paying $8 cash corn in different parts of the Corn Belt today. We even were earlier this week, and you would certainly think with $8 cash corn that we would be cutting into demand, and we're really not. We just got done talking about ethanol. If you're going to consume more ethanol gallons into our fuel supply, it's certainly going to support their margin structure. So as you look at inflation, we got consumer price inflation data and producer price index inflation data this week, and 8.5% on the CPI, 11.2% on the producer price index for a 12-month rolling average on that index. Those are some high numbers, highest we've seen since 1981 on the CPI, and the highest number we've had in the data set for the producer price index since they've been keeping track of that. So inflation is really not slowing down. And I think it's an important conversation as we talk about commodities, because prices have to get to a high enough point where they ration demand if our carryouts are going to be extremely tight. We're moving towards that level, but unfortunately, we are not rationing demand at $8 cash corn, which is a little bit crazy. So the inflation story is a key variable, I think, as we talk about markets this year. It's something we talked with our producers about at our winter grain meetings back in January. That was really going to be a key piece of how this commodity story unfolds in 2022. So until inflation can abate a little bit, we're just not hurting demand or slowing down demand, and that's evident in ethanol margins. It's ethanol and livestock feeding margins, although those are getting a little bit tighter. But overall, these values are not slowing down our consumption.
Luke, you mentioned the prices currently for corn and soybeans. As we look at those and you look back on other years, are you seeing any trends when it comes to seasonal patterns?
Absolutely. We typically see that in our row crop markets. We tend to find seasonal highs between April and July. We're just getting into that time of the year where the market's going to be concerned about getting a crop planted. How does that crop condition look as that crop comes out of the ground? So this year, there's certainly some added anxiety around that, especially with the acreage number that we got at the end of March from the USDA, specifically as it relates to corn. Those acreage numbers are less than what corn consumers wanted to see as we look at the balance sheet and we deal with uncertainty in the Black Sea region and what we're going to have for production there. So seasonally, this market has everything that it needs to hold true to seasonal price patterns. That being, finding a high at some point in the next 90 days certainly seems realistic. And this corn market's been up 5 days in a row. D's 23. We've had 18 days of consecutive higher closes. So the market is certainly responding to a bullish set of acreage information and a planting season really hasn't gotten an early start. It's not late by any means, but the market's certainly going to be sensitive to making sure that this crop gets planted timely and then it gets off to a good start.
Luke, I want to give you the final word this week. When it comes to all these factors you're talking about, what kind of marketing suggestions are you offering to producers when it comes to marketing their grain right now?
Well, we want to encourage producers to make sure you have a handle on your costs. We talked about inflation. We know that it's going to cost more to produce a crop this year, and there's a lot of uncertainty about how to produce a crop in 2023, despite some attractive pricing opportunities that far out. But if you know your costs, it's going to give you confidence to execute. We certainly know that it's dry in the Western Corn Belt, and we've had that as part of our daily conversations with producers to make sure that you understand what crop insurance policy that you have and how that policy protects you and allows you to market your grain in an environment where it is dry. We're safely above those spring insurance prices of $5.90 on corn and $14.33 on soybeans. If you have a revenue-based insurance policy with a harvest price option, you should be able to market up to your insured levels with confidence. And we want to make sure producers are taking advantage of these revenue opportunities, even if they're in a dry land scenario. So if you're confused about that, we'd encourage you to make sure you have a conversation with your crop insurance agent so that you recognize what that policy is doing for you so that you can take advantage of some of these really attractive new crop prices, even in a dry land production scenario.
A lot of things to keep an eye on, Luke. Appreciate you joining us here on Market Journal this week.
Thanks, guys.